Okay, good morning, everybody. We wanted to make sure that everyone was awake, so we got you moving a little bit from downstairs to upstairs. I'll try to be extra loud so that everyone can hear me. If anyone can hear me, so let me know, and I will try to be a little bit louder. We're trying to see if we can get on the air. It seems to be a technical issue right now, but we're going to look into it and see. It could be at the very least when Rabbi Finkelstein comes for his shiur. He should know how to turn on the air. But we're trying to see if we can get it done. Okay, so thank you again. A couple of you have continued to ask me about my parents, but my father, Baruch Hashem, my parents are planning on coming back this week. They should be home in a couple of days. So Be'ezrat Hashem, after Shavuot, my father will be back. They're only here for a few weeks, and then they're going back for the summer to the U.S. But my father should be able to pick up at least for a couple of weeks the week after Shavuot, and he looks forward to seeing everyone and to learning with you. So I was trying to figure out what to do this week, and obviously, as those of you who have been here in the last few weeks know, that we generally do Parshat HaShavua. I also know that around the time of the Chagim, my father tends to sometimes take a break and do something connected to the Chag, so I was thinking about Shavuot, and then I realized that we had a very unique opportunity, that we have a class on Erev Yom Yerushalayim, and that while many of us, if not all of us, celebrate Yom Yerushalayim on some level, not many of us have necessarily taken the time to really learn about Yerushalayim in some of the sources. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Yerushalayim and its uniqueness and really see some, I think, very fascinating and meaningful sources that will hopefully enhance our Yom Yerushalayim that commences this evening. So we're going to start with source number one. Well, actually, I'll start with a question. Does anyone know how many times in Chamisha Chumshei Torah the name Yerushalayim appears? Oh, okay, you guys all got it. Correct. The answer is in all of the 5 books of the Torah, the name Yerushalayim does not appear once. It does appear in Tanakh, in Nevi'im and Ketuvim, but in the Torah itself, the name Yerushalayim does not appear, nor is the place of where the Beit HaMikdash is going to be actually identified in the Torah. So the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim in source number 1 tries to understand why that would be. Why is it that we would think, in fact, the Torah references Hamakom Asher Ani Azkir et Shemi, or Hamakom Asher Evchar. Right? God talks about the place I will choose, the place where I will mention my name, the place where you will gather. That's mentioned often. Why is that place never identified in the Torah itself? So says the Rambam in source number 1. Ein safek etzli gamkein shehamakom asher yichado Avraham ben Nevuah Hayayadua Eitzel Moshe Rabbeinu ve'Eitzel Rabin. Says the Rambam, I am confident that Moshe Rabbeinu and many of the leaders of the Jewish people did know where this location was. It was a location that had been identified by Avram Avinu in Nevuah, and as we know that there's reference to it often in the Midrash regarding places that the Avos had encountered upon and been involved in. And says the Rambam, I'm positive that Moshe Rabbeinu knew where it was. Sha'avram tziva otam sheyeh beit avodah, because Avram had commanded that this place was going to be a house of worship. K'moshe be'er hamitargem ve'amar ufalech v'tzali Avraham taman be'atra hahu ve'amar kadam Hashem hacha yehon palchin deraya. This is a reference to the Aramaic Targum Onkelos, where Avram identifies where this place is going to be. So then the question becomes, well, if Moshe knew where it was, and many of the leaders knew where it was, why was Yerushalayim itself never identified in the Torah? Why did Amcha not necessarily know where this place was going to be until it ultimately was chosen? Why is it not mentioned specifically? Aval beremez elav, it was only mentioned or hinted at. Ve'amar el hamakom asher yivchar Hashem. Right? God will refer to it in very, very general terms, but not, or Moshe refers to it in very general terms, but not in specific terms. Yesh bo etzli shalosh chachmot. He says, I have 3 suggestions as to why that would be. And it's so interesting to see how important and how poignant these suggestions are. Ha'achat mehem. Reason number 1, why the Torah never identified, or why the Jewish nation explicitly never identified it. Shelo yachziku bo ha'umot v'yilachamu alav milchama chazaka kesheyedu shezeh makom min haaretz hu tachlit haTorah. So that our enemies and the other nations would not fight us for it and would not try to take over it once they realized how important it was to us, and again, how poignant that is and how prescient that is in terms of what we're dealing with today, and how the places that are the focal points of much of our conflict are our holiest sites that are so important to us. That's number one. Number two, shelo yafsiduhu mi shehu biyadam ata v'yashchituhu b'chol yecholtam, so that those nations who do control it right now won't destroy it. Won't take care of it. If you think about, for example, I just think about I was recently talking to someone about Kever Shechem, about Kever Yossi, which is in Shechem, and how often it gets destroyed, and how while, again, we're not getting into the political, but Israel has certain military control over it, yet it's in an Arab city, it's in a Palestinian city, and is constantly being destroyed. So if the nations knew, and they knew they were in control of this place that was holy to us, they might destroy it. V'hashlishit. But then the Rambam says the third reason, v'hi hachazaka shebehem, shelo yivakesh kol shevet, heyoto b'nachalato v'limshol bo. Had it been identified from the very beginning as they entered the land that this was going to be where the Beit HaMikdash was, every shevet would have fought for that land, would have fought for that area, in order not to cause infighting between the Jewish people. Because if everyone knew this Yerushalayim, that's where it's going to be, then we all would have fought for that to be within our Nachala. And just like there were people who fought against Aaron being identified as the Kohen, in order to avoid that kind of infighting, therefore it was not identified until it was ready to be revealed. And therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu specifically designed it that only once the Jewish people had a king, and that king had a certain control over the people, could it now be identified, this is where the Beit HaMikdash is going to be built, because then the king could have a certain authority and be able to carry it out. So it's very interesting that the Rambam gives two main reasons, both of which are unfortunately familiar to us, whether it's the infighting that would result from a desire to have a certain authority or to have a level of Kedusha within our midst, versus or the what results when our enemies or other nations recognize the areas that are important to us. So that's why, according to the Rambam, that Yerushalayim is not mentioned explicitly. However, the truth is that if we look in the sources, there are a number of indications and hints to the name Yerushalayim that do come up throughout the Torah, and specifically in Sefer Bereshit, and I'd like to explore those with you right now. If you look at source number 2, this is a pasuk as Avraham finishes the fighting of the war between the 4 kings and the 5 kings, as he exits and is victorious in the fight and he saves Lot, the Torah tells us the following: Umalki tzedek melech shalem, hotzi lechem v'yayin, v'hu choen la'el elyon. This king Malki-Tzedek, who was the king of a place called Shalem, he comes out to Avram with lechem v'yayin, he comes out with bread, and he comes out with wine, and he is a Kohen to Hashem. Targum Onkelos, the Onkelos translation here, identifies who is this Malki-Tzedek. Umalki-Tzedek hu Shem bar Noach. This was the Shem, the son of Noach. And what is this place called Shalem, says Targum Onkelos? Malka di Yerushalayim. He was the king of Yerushalayim. So according to this source, the earliest idea that we have that there is a place called Yerushalayim is at this point when Avram is on his way back from defeating the 4 kings, and yet the name is called Shalem. Moving on, we see another source where a reference to Yerushalayim is made, but not explicitly. Source number 3, Vayikra Avraham. This is again after Akedat Yitzchak. We're on a place called Har HaMoriah. Vayikra Avraham Shem Hamakom Hahu. What does Avram call the place where Akedat Yitzchak took place? Hashem Yireh. Asher Yamer Hayom Behar Hashem Yireh. So Avram calls the place Hashem Yireh. Why? So that it will be said that on this place Hashem will see. What will Hashem see? Or Hashem will appear, I should say. Excuse me. Says Rashi, what does it mean Hashem Yireh? Pshuto Ketargumo. Hashem Yivchar V'yireh lo et hamakom hazeh lahashrot bo shechinato ulahakriv kod korbanot. Hashem should choose that this should be the place where his shechina will reside and where korbanot will be brought. So we have this place, which we know, according to the way the Mefarshim is Yerushalayim, And it has two names that have been called, that it's been given so far in Bereshis. We have Melchizedek, who called it Shalem. And we have Avraham Avinu, who called it Yireh. Look at source number 4, a beautiful and fascinating medrash. The medrash says the following. At Motzah, shenikra Beit HaMikdash Shalem. On the one hand, we have a place where the Beit HaMikdash is called Shalem, shene'emar u'malkitzedek melech Shalem, v'hu Shem ben Noach shene'emar v'hu kohen l'chel elyon. And that's Shem, the son of Noach. Mitargaminan, v'hu kohen l'chel elyon, v'hu mishamesh kadam el ilah. Havez Hashem, meaning he was someone who would serve Hashem, and that's Shem. Avraham kara lebeit hamikdash Yireh Hashem or Yireh. Avram called it Yireh. Shene'emar vayikra Avraham shema makumahu Hashem Yireh. Said Yireh. Sorry, Hashem Yireh. Sorry, am I going to get? Thank you. You're right. Hashem Yireh. You are correct. Thank you. Hashem Yireh. I was getting it confused. Says the Medrash the following thing: Amar hamakom. Im ekra oto shalem. If I call this place Shalem, which is the name that Melchizedek has given, kimoshe karu shem, ani avatel divrei Avraham ohavai shekaro yireh. That I'm not taking into account the name that Avram's given to it. He called it Hashem Yireh. Va'im ani korei oto Yireh. And if I call it Yireh, ani avatel divrei shem hatzadik shekaro Shalem. So then I'm not taking into account the name that Shem gave to it. Ma asa hakadosh baruch hu. What did Hashem do? Shiteif mashe karu shnehem. Avraham karo Yireh, v'Shem karo Shalem, v'hakadosh baruch hu Yerushalayim. Okay, so what did Hakadosh Baruch Hu do? He took the two names. He took the name Yireh, and he took the name Shalem, and he combined them, and from there came Yerushalayim. Now, just to even understand this a little bit better, if you look, if you're thinking about it, well, why is it called? Why is it's a little bit different? It was Yireh Shalem. How did it get to Yerushalayim? So the gematria of the aleph and the hey is 6, and that turned into a vav. So it went from Yireh, Yeru, Shalem. And if you're thinking for a second, then wait a second, we don't call it Yerushalayim, we call it Yerushalayim. So that's where Tosfos in source number 5 references this. And he says, Yesh mifarshim dezeh Yerushalayim shenikra Shem Avram Avinu shekaruhu har Hashem Yireh va'Iyar haya nikra kvar Shalem, was already called Shalem, and Avram added Yireh u'malkitzedek melech Shalem v'nikra Yerushalayim al Shem Yireh ve'al Shem Shalem likach ein anu notnin yud b'Yerushalayim ben lamed lemem. Says Tosfos, if you look in many places or in most places where the name of the Yerushalayim is written, it is actually written without a yud. And that is a reference or a hint to the fact that the name Yerushalayim is actually a combination of Yireh or Yeru and Shalem. We all know that. When did Hashem do this? Meaning, no, correct. There's no, again, this is a medrash. And as with any medrash that we have, it could be that it occurred at some point, or it could be it's meant to teach us a lesson. Meaning that as with any medrash, but the sense seems to be that at some point, again, with anything we're talking about God and when did God do and what did He say, there's something about these names that caused the name Yerushalayim, which appears later on in Tanakh, to have stemmed from that. According to this medrash, the name Yerushalayim came from this. Now, if we understand, as many of us are aware, we know that when we talk about the name of something or the name of someone represents their essence, which is why when parents give a name to a child, we put so much thought and depth into it because we know that the name of someone or something is meant to represent his essence. If you look here in source number 7, Rabbi Yitzchak Mirsky, who has a beautiful Haggadah called the Haggadat Hegyonei Halacha, he suggests that the fact that the name Yerushalayim was born out of what we call a chibur, out of a connection between two names, that itself is a hint to its essence. Umitoch shehashem Yerushalayim nolad al yedei hitchabrut. The name Yerushalayim comes from a chibur, a connection between two different names that were given. Nitan b'Yerushalayim teva shel chibur. That hints to us the fact that the essence of what Yerushalayim is Yerushalayim, as I put it here at the beginning, at the top of the source sheet, the city of connection. That the essence of Yerushalayim is it is a connector. It is a source of connection. And that's hinted to by the fact that we take two names and the two names combine to one. And if you think about it, this also very much is hinted at in source number 6 in the famous pasuk where the Torah where in Tehillim David HaMelech describes Yerushalayim. The pasuk Gimel in source number 6, Yerushalayim haBenuyah, as the pasuk says, Ki Iyar shechubra la yachdav. Is it a city that, again, if you translate it, chubra la yachdav, it connects to it together. Meaning, there is a sense of connection, and we're going to see soon there's a number of different interpretations amongst the Yerushalmi and the Medrash. What exactly is the connection? What connects what? Connecting who to whom? Or connecting what to whom? What is that source? But already here in this pasuk, we have this sense that Yerushalayim is the city of connection. So the question is, what does that mean? What does that mean? In what way is Yerushalayim the city of connection? So I think there are two main directions we can take with this. Both of which I think many will resonate with us all in terms of understanding Yerushalayim as a place of connection. First and foremost, well, let's see what does Yerushalayim act to connect? Who does Yerushalayim act to connect? Let's say it that way. People and Hashem. First and foremost, a very, very simple level, Yerushalayim, or I think the best way to say it is Yerushalayim acts to connect heaven and earth, to connect us to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yerushalayim is that place where, for many of us, when we're there. I'm talking specifically now about the old city simply because Yerushalayim has expanded, but obviously all of Yerushalayim has a certain status. There's a sense of connection. There's a deeper sense of purpose and a deeper sense of connection that we feel to something beyond ourselves. And this is not by coincidence. This has been true throughout the ages. If you look in source number 8, the first time, or not the first time, but one of the first times that the Avot encounter this place that is later identified as Yerushalayim is the place with Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov Avinu, as we know, is running away from his brother Esav, and he stops and he has a dream. Again, there's big debate exactly where he was and how he got there, but many of the Midrashim do identify that somehow as the place of the Beit HaMikdash. And Yaakov, and what does the pasuk say? Vayikatz Yaakov mishnato. Yaakov wakes up after his dream. Vayomer, Achen yesh Adonai b'makom hazeh, v'anochi lo yadati. Hashem is here, and I had no idea. Vayira vayomar. He gets nervous, and he says, Ma nora hamakom hazeh, ein zeh ki'im beit Elohim, v'zeh shar hashamayim. He gets nervous, and he says, wow, this is the house of God, v'zeh shar hashamayim. And I think the key for us is those last few words where he says, what is this place? This is the place, this is the gate to heaven. What is a gate? A gate is that point of connection, is that point of entry. And what he's basically saying is, look at how Rashi describes it. How does Rashi explain Zeh Shar HaShamayim? Makom tfilah la'alot tfilatam HaShamayim. This is the place where our prayers will go up to Shamayim. This is the place where there is that connection, that inherent connection between heaven and earth, and our prayers are able to enter heaven. And in fact, that is why, we're going to skip a couple of sources now for 1 second. If you look at source number 12, we have the famous idea that many of us are familiar with, which is the idea that where are we supposed to face whenever we daven? We're supposed to face towards Yerushalayim. Okay. This is actually something that many people get confused about, especially those who make Aliyah from America. They think that wherever you are in the world, you're always supposed to face east. Okay? So they're in Israel, and they're like, okay, which way is east? So sometimes, even in Israel, you're supposed to face east, but the answer is you're always supposed to face Yerushalayim. Look at the Gemara. The Gemara says, Haya omeid b'chutz la'aretz. If you were standing in chutz la'aretz, yichavein et libo, he should direct his heart keneged Eretz Yisrael. Shene'emar v'yitpalalu elecha derech artam. Okay, you should always face towards Eretz Yisrael. Haya omeid be'eretz Yisrael. If you're standing in Eretz Yisrael, yichavein et libo keneged Yerushalayim. Then you should be focusing towards Yerushalayim. Shene'emar v'yitpalalu el Hashem derech ha'ir asher bacharta. You should daven to Hashem through the city that you have chosen. Haya omeid be'Yerushalayim. If you're standing in Yerushalayim, then where do you go? Yichavein et libo keneged Beit HaMikdash. Then you point towards the Beit HaMikdash. Excuse me. Shene'emar v'yitpalalu el Bayit hazeh. Haya omeid be'Beit HaMikdash. Yichavein et libo keneged Beit HaKodashei HaKodashim. If you're standing in the Beit HaMikdash, then you have to point in the direction of the Kodesh HaKodashim. Shene'emar v'yitpalalu el hamakom hazeh. Haya omeid be'Beit Kodesh HaKodashim. Yichavein et libo keneged HaParochet. And if you're in the Kodesh HaKodashim, then you should fake it, Beit HaKaporet, excuse me. You should point towards the Kaporet, which is where the cover is. Hayomed achorei Beit HaKaporet, yireh atzmo ki'ilu lifnei HaKaporet. If you're behind it, then you should look as if you're facing towards it. Nimtza therefore, concludes the Gemara, Omeid b'mizrach, machzir panav l'ma'arav. If you're standing in the east, you should face west. B'ma'arav, machzir panav l'mizrach. B'darom, machzir panav l'tzafon. B'tzafon, machzir panav l'darom. Nimtzeu, concludes the Gemara, kol Yisrael mechuvanim el libam l'makom echad. It now enables all of us, we're all facing in one specific direction. Now, if you may have noticed in the very beginning of this Gemara, it didn't necessarily say that a person needs to physically face. It said Yechaven et libo. You should, in your mind, focus that way. Tosfos here points out that it's not just about where you're focusing in your mind, but you should actually face directly in that direction. And that's the minhag that we have. That's the halacha that we have. That when we're in Chutz La'aretz, we always face towards Eretz Yisrael. When we're in Eretz Yisrael, we face towards Yerushalayim. When we're in Yerushalayim, we face towards the Old City or towards Harabais. Now, on the one hand, this might just be a nice idea to help us with our kavanah. But if we take what Rashi was saying in a deeper level, what Rashi was describing to us earlier, that the place of Yerushalayim is the Shar Hashamayim, what we're really doing is we're really directing our tefillot towards Yerushalayim, and in Yerushalayim is where they're going to enter heaven. Now again, how exactly this works from a metaphysical level, we don't know. And what exactly does that mean? Does God not Of course God hears us wherever we are. But there's this sense that Yerushalayim acts as the entry point for us to heaven, and that's one of the reasons that we're meant to face towards Yerushalayim. And we see in the Nevi'im, and we're not going to go through this inside, but in sources 14 and 15, we see that in the Nevi'im, and even in Daniel used to face Yerushalayim. In source 15, it says that Daniel himself, when he would daven, he would face towards Yerushalayim. And in source number 14, again, there's this discussion of facing our tefillot towards Yerushalayim. Now, a deeper level to understanding this, to understanding the idea that Yerushalayim is Shar Hashamayim, is actually hinted at in source. Now we're going to go back for a second to source number 9. Source number 9 discusses something very, very, very fascinating. The pasuk says, the Gemara starts as follows: V'amar le Rav Nachman le Rav Yitzchak. Rav Nachman said the following to Rav Yitzchak: My dichtiv b'kirbecha kadosh v'lo avo ba'ir. Mishum dekirbecha ba'kadosh lo avo ba'ir. What does it mean when the pasuk says that with amongst you is holiness, but I won't come to the city? Says the Gemara, just if because there's holiness you won't come to the city. Amar le hachi amar Rabbi Yochanan. This is what Rabbi Yochanan meant to say. Amar hakadosh baruch hu lo avo b'Yerushalayim shel mala ad she'avo l'Yerushalayim shel mata. I won't come and enter the Yerushalayim shel mala, up in heaven, until I have returned, or I have basically reside, i.e., when God returns back to the Yerushalayim shel mata. Says the Gemara, Umi ika Yerushalayim shel mala? Is there such a thing as a Yerushalayim shel mala? Says the Gemara, yes. Dichtiv Yerushalayim habenuya ki Iyar shechubra la yachdav. Yes, there is something called the Yerushalayim Shel Mala, because as the Torah talks about, as the pasuk says, Yerushalayim haBenuyah ki Iyar shechubra, it connects things together. That is a hint, says the Gemara, to this concept of a Yerushalayim Shel Mala. So again, this hints to the same idea of there being a Shar Hashamayim. There is a Sha'ar, or there is a city of Yerushalayim, according to Chazal, that is parallel, that is up in the metaphysical realms, parallel to our Yerushalayim Shel Mata, and that is through which the sense of Kedusha and all of our tefillot are able to go up to Shamayim. Says Rabbeinu Bechaya in source number 10, he says something very, very interesting. He says, that's why, in many places, even though it might be written as Yerushalayim without a Yud, that's why we call it Yerushalayim. What does that have to do with anything? So he points out that if you Yerushalayim is is plural, is Rabim, like Einayim, Raglayim, Yadayim. So why do we refer to it as Yerushalayim? In some places, actually written with the Yud, because, says Rabbeinu Bechaya, and this is in source number 10, there's actually 2 Yerushalayim. There's a Yerushalayim Shel Mata, and there's a Yerushalayim Shel Mala. Sorry. A pair, exactly. It's a pair, just like Yadayim Raglayim. So even the name itself, once again, hints to this connection, but also hints to this duality, this dual nature, this idea that Yerushalayim itself is our gateway up into heaven, parallel to the Yerushalayim Shel Mata. So if we understand this, idea, that Yerushalayim is this sense of connection, is the source of connection between heaven and earth, between man and God, between our, I guess the way we would say it, our physical world and the spiritual world up above, we can then understand something very, very interesting, an interesting Rashi in Sefer Bereshis. If you look at source number 11, we have a famous story of when Yaakov and Yosef reconnect. Yosef has been in Mitzrayim for many years. He reveals himself to his brothers. He tells Yaakov and the family to come down to Yerushalayim, to come down to Mitzrayim. And Yosef and Yaakov finally reconnect and meet again after 22 years. And the Torah tells us, this is actually, forgive me, this is not with Yosef and Yaakov. This is when Yosef and Binyamin for the first time. This is before Yosef reveals himself, excuse me. And Yosef, at this point, it's after he reveals himself, and they now hug each other. And the Torah tells us, Vayipol al tzavarei Binyamin achiv, that Yosef and Binyamin, as they embraced, Yosef fell on Binyamin's necks, and he cried, Ubinyamin bacha al tzavarav. And Binyamin cried on Yosef's neck. Okay, so what exactly does that mean? What are the two necks, and why are they crying? So Rashi famously notes the following idea. What does it mean, Vayipol al tzavarei Binyamin achiv vayefk? So what was Yosef crying about? Al shnei mikdashot she'atidin lihiyot b'chelko shel Binyamin v'sofan lecharev. He was crying about the two batei mikdashot, the first Beit Mikdash and the second Beit Mikdash, that technically, although officially they weren't in the chelek of Binyamin because they were in the chelek that belongs to everybody. Yerushalayim belongs to all of the Shvatim. But it was in the chelek of Binyamin. It was physically in the chelek of Binyamin, and Yosef was crying about those two batei mikdash that were going to be destroyed in the future. And why was Binyamin crying on Yosef's neck? Al mishkan Binyamin bacha al tzavarav al mishkan Shiloh she'atid liyot b'chelko shel Yosef v'sofer lecharev. He was crying about the Mishkan in Shiloh that was in the chelek of Yosef's shevet, that where Yosef's shevet was ultimately going to. Shiloh was in the chelek of Yosef's shevet, and therefore he was crying about the Mishkan that was going to be destroyed in Shiloh. Which is a very nice idea. Many of us may be familiar with this Rashi. The question is, what does it mean? And where did Rashi get this from? And it's based on a medrash. Where did this come from? Number one, why are they crying about these things? And number two, where is it hinted to in the pasuk? In what sense? Where do we get the sense that there is something about them crying on each other's necks that somehow is now a reference to the Beit HaMikdash and to the Mishkan? So I can't say that we can answer the question fully, but I heard a direction that resonated with me from Rabbi Moshe Shapiro, Rav Moshe Shapiro, Zecher Tzedek Livracha, one of the big Baalei Machshava here in Yerushalayim. I heard him give a shiur once, and he made the following suggestion that I think is very powerful. He said the hint to all of this in the pasuk was the neck. He says, what is the neck in a person? What does the neck function as in a person? The neck is the physical connection between a person's mind, between his head and his body, between his physical body and his spiritual side of who he is. And therefore, the neck, just like that is what it does within a person, says, understood Rashi and Chazal, that the neck is a symbol of the Beit HaMikdash, the Batei Mikdash, and the Mishkan. Because what do the Beit HaMikdash and the Mishkan do? What do they function as? The connector between the physical world and the spiritual world. And therefore, by the fact that the Torah stresses, it doesn't just say that they cried, they hugged and they cried. It says Binyamin cried on his two necks. What are the two necks? So it says, understood Rashi to mean, it means the two Batei Mikdash that were in Binyamin's chelek, and the neck of Yosef refers to the Mishkan of Shiloh. And therefore, again, this just highlights for us the role that the Beit HaMikdash, and by extension, Yerushalayim plays, the role of a connector. The role of connecting us to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, connecting heaven to earth, connecting our physical selves to our spiritual reality that is beyond us. And that is, I think, one direction. When we understand Yerushalayim as a city of connection, we understand it to mean the city of connection between us, between heaven and earth, and between us and God. Rav Aryeh Kaplan has a beautiful book. Rav Aryeh Kaplan has many beautiful books. Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan has a beautiful small book. It's called Jerusalem, the Eye of the Universe. And it's a book all about Yerushalayim. And he just points out, just to complete this first part, that Yerushalayim isn't just a one-way direction. Just like our tefillot and anything that we give to HaKadosh Baruch Hu goes through Yerushalayim, So too, says Rabbi Kaplan, any kind of what's referred to in Chazal as shefa, any kind of goodness or any kind of spirituality that God brings into the world also goes through Yerushalayim. If you look at source number 16, the fact that Jerusalem is the gate of heaven has another important implication. Just as things can go in through a gate, so they can emerge. Thus, all spiritual sustenance and blessing come only through Yerushalayim, as it says, God will bless you from Zion, Yivarechecha Hashem Mitzion. And all bracha, just like our tefillot enter heaven through Yerushalayim, so too any bracha that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives to the world comes through Yerushalayim as well. And that way, we see Yerushalayim as this connector between heaven and earth. But there's another way that Yerushalayim acts as a connector. It's not just between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not just between heaven and earth. It also acts as a connector between all of Am Yisrael. Look at source number 17. This is a Yerushalmi. Ki yema Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said the following statement. What does it mean, Yerushalayim habenuya ki ir shechubra la yachdav? Ir shemichaberet Yisrael zelazeh. It's a city that connects one Jew to another. Okay. And Rabbi Mirsky in source number 18 suggests that this could be why Yerushalayim was not, as we know, nitchalka l'shvatim. In source number 18, Libi rotze lomar shemachmat segula zu shel Yerushalayim shehu chibur lo nitchalka Yerushalayim l'shvatim. Because Yerushalayim's essence is, it is a connector, it is the place that connects us all together. Therefore, famously, we have this idea, Yerushalayim lo nitchalka l'shvatim. Yerushalayim didn't belong to any one shevet. It was found physically, I think it's usually in the border between Binyamin and Yehudah. And so physically, that's where the area is. But but Yerushalayim itself did not belong to any one shevet. It belonged to all of us. It belonged to Am Yisrael. It was the source of connection. It was how we were able to connect each other. In fact, this is already hinted to in the Gemara that we saw. The Gemara said, why does everyone face towards Yerushalayim when they daven? Because it said, Nimsa kulam mechuvanim el makom echad. Everyone is facing one direction. Even in Galus, Eretz Yisrael becomes the great unifier. Eretz Yisrael becomes the great unifier because every single Jew, no matter where they live, where are they facing when they daven? Facing towards Yerushalayim. It becomes a unifier for all of us. The Maharal in source number 19 suggests that this is why we know we have the famous Gemara that talks about what was the cause of the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash. Says the Maharal in source number 19. V'amar ki kol echad charev al yedei inyan hara'oi. Each Beit HaMikdash was destroyed for its own reasons. Ki b'shvil sinat chinam necharav Yerushalayim. Why was sinat chinam the thing that led to the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash? There were many other things that were going on at that time. Why sinat chinam? Ki al yedei Beit HaMikdash v'Yerushalayim na'aseh kol Yisrael ki ish echad. Because what Yerushalayim and the Beit HaMikdash is they are the great unifier. They unify us. That's what its goal is to be something that unifies Am Yisrael. At that time, once there was a Beit HaMikdash, they couldn't build their own bamot. They couldn't build their own mizbechot. There was one central mizbeach. All of Am Yisrael was connected through the Beit HaMikdash. Ad she'al yedei Beit HaMikdash hayu Yisrael am echad. Am Yisrael became one. Ukasher haya chiluk beinehem. But when they then, Am Yisrael, began to fight amongst themselves and cause that separation, when they themselves no longer were unified, nechrav hamakom hazeh shehu naaseh la'achdut Yisrael. Then, by definition, the Beit HaMikdash had to be destroyed because the purpose of the Beit HaMikdash was to unify us. And if we're going to reject that unification, if we're going to reject that unity, then the Beit HaMikdash could no longer be around. And that is why the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed specifically through Sinat Chinam, because the purpose of Yerushalayim was to unify us. In source number 20, Rabbi Kaplan points out beautifully another way, another level to understanding how Yerushalayim acted as a unifier for all of Am Yisrael. So I'll read this with you. It's really beautiful the way he describes it. He talks about how it acted as a unifier, not just simply because we're all facing Yerushalayim, but because there were times when all of us had to come to Yerushalayim and interact with each other and be inspired by each other. And that connected much more unity within the context of Avodat Hashem. Among the most dramatic of these observances, source number 20, were the 3 annual pilgrimages. There are 3 festivals, Sukkot, Pesach, and Shavuot, during which, in the days of the temple, the Torah required every Jew who was able to make a pilgrimage to the place chosen by God. The Torah thus states, 3 times a year shall all your males appear before the Lord your God in the place which he shall choose, on the feast of Matzot, on the feast of Shavuot, and on the feast of Sukkot. During these pilgrimages, Jews poured into Yerushalayim from all over the world. They renewed friendships and exchanged news. As a result, the Jews were united and molded into a single people. But most important, all this was done within a context of holiness and serving Hashem. The fact that so many people were gathering in worship would reinforce all of them religiously and morally. So much so that in the course of these pilgrimages, no Jew would be suspected of harming another in any way. Thus, Jerusalem united the Jewish people in the context that directed this unity towards the unity of God. So it wasn't just that we came together and had a good time, but this was done within the context of that other connection between us and Hashem. This helps us understand why the place chosen by God had to be a city. Why did it have to be a city? What is a city? Besides a mere concentration of people, it is a place where civilization grows and develops. The very concentration of people in a city results in an exchange of growth and ideas. It is therefore no coincidence that the growth of civilization in general has historically emanated from its cities. While the farmlands provided food for the body, the cities provided food for the mind and soul. As Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch points out, the Hebrew word for city, Iyar, comes from the same base as the word ur, to awaken, lehitorer, to wake up. It is the city that awakens mankind, bringing out his best creative instincts. Indeed, in the Torah we find that the building of cities led to many of the most important developments of civilization. The focal point of Jewish civilization was to develop a relationship with God, and this too required a city. Jerusalem became the place where Jews from all over the world would gather to exchange ideas and develop a civilization enhancing this relationship. Vital to this process were the temple and the many teachers of Torah who lived in Jerusalem, which will be discussed in a later chapter. But in general, it was Jerusalem that was the city, the awakener, arousing and motivating the Jew towards his mission. It is not very surprising that our sages teach that Jerusalem is the highest realization of the concept of the city. So Rabbi Kaplan beautifully notes that the goal of Yerushalayim was not just simply that it became a place where we got together, but it became the place where we united within the service, within the context of Avodat Hashem, and which pushed us to grow in our Avodat Hashem and in our religiosity, and encouraging us as a nation to continue to develop, and as he says, as a civilization in the highest way. So what we've seen so far today, and I know that, I'm sure everyone, I sense that we're a little hot in here, so we're going to end in a little bit early, give you guys some time to have a break before the next share, and I apologize we weren't able to get the air on. What we've seen so far, we talked about the history of the name Yerushalayim, and we noted that the name Yerushalayim comes from 2 names in Sefer Bereshis, Shalem and Yireh, Shalem given by Shem, and Yireh given by Avram, and how the Medrash notes beautifully that HaKadosh Baruch Hu couldn't pick one or the other, so he connected them and created, and that's where the name Yerushalayim, or Yerushalayim specifically, comes from. And we talked about how if the name Yerushalayim came out of a chibur, out of a connection, that hints to the fact that the essence of Yerushalayim is that it is a city of connection. We talked about how it is a city of connection, first and foremost, between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, between heaven and earth. It is the place that we turn to when we pray. It is the place that Yaakov identifies as Shar HaShamayim, the gate to heaven. It is the place where, according to Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, any goodness that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to give to us comes down through Yerushalayim. It's hinted to from the fact that we have that the Gemara talks about a Yerushalayim Shel Mala, a Yerushalayim in the heavens that is opposite the Yerushalayim Shel Mata, which is why we call it Yerushalayim in the plural as a pair, because there's two Yerushalayim. That is one type of chibur, one type of connection that results from Yerushalayim. And the other type of chibur that results from Yerushalayim is the fact that it connects all Jews. Yerushalayim lo nitchal shvatim. It wasn't separated. It doesn't belong to any one shevet. It belongs to everybody. Ir shemichaberet Yisrael zelazeh. It is a city that connects Am Yisrael one to the other. And as Rabbi Kaplan points out, it becomes the place where we come together, all in the service of God. I'd like to end with just 2 more minutes to explain a beautiful idea that I heard that Rav Soloveitchik writes regarding the Kedusha. That Yerushalayim isn't just the city that connects us all, but Yerushalayim is also the source of all Kedusha in the world. And this begins with a Medrash in source number 21. Ad shelo nivchara Yerushalayim hayta kol Eretz Yisrael ruya l'shchina. Until Yerushalayim was chosen or identified, All of Eretz Yisrael had the Shekhinah. Mishenivchara Yerushalayim Yatsa Eretz Yisrael. Once Yerushalayim was chosen, the Shekhinah left all of Eretz Yisrael and identified specifically stayed within Yerushalayim. And there's a fascinating conversation. We'll just mention it briefly without getting into all of the details because it's a very, very big machloket. But we know that there's a big debate regarding the status of the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael and Yerushalayim today. It is understood, the Gemara mentions that there were two main times when the Jewish nation came and quote-unquote settled / reconquered the land. In Chazal, it's identified as Olei Mitzrayim and Olei Bavel. Olei Mitzrayim refers to the first time that the Jewish people entered the land, when Yoshua led Am Yisrael into the land. That's called Olei Mitzrayim, people who made Aliyah from Mitzrayim. And according to most opinions, the Kedusha that Eretz Yisrael received at that time was only temporary. That once Yoshua entered the land with the Am Yisrael, it became a land of Kedusha, a land of holiness. And yet, when the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, when the first Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael was removed because it was only given because they conquered the land. And once the land was conquered from them, that Kedusha, what was called, was Bitela and was not Kudsha La'asid Lavo. In contrast, according to many Rishonim, specifically the Rambam as well, and although the Rambam does say that the Kedusha of Yerushalayim remained, even after the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, Yerushalayim remained, but the Kedusha of the rest of Eretz Yisrael was Batel. The second time Am Yisrael come is what we call Olei Bavel. When Ezra and his followers come to Yerushalayim, and they now resettle the land of Yerushalayim, all of a sudden the land becomes holy again. And that, says the Rambam and many Rishonim, that was not just Kidsha L'Shaita, it wasn't just a temporary Kedusha, it was a Kedusha L'Asid Lavo. That Kedusha, once they settled in Yerushalayim and then settled on the outskirts and continued to settle the land, that area, any area which was settled by Olei Bavel, is Kidsha L'Shaita v'Kidsha L'Asid Lavo. It is eternally Kadosh, it is Kadosh until today, until the time, and even until the times of Mashiach. And the question that the Rishonim try to understand is why? Why would the Kedusha that began with Yoshua be Batel once the first Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, and yet the Kedusha that Ezra instituted did not become Batel after the second Beit HaMikdash was destroyed? In fact, we could argue, what Yoshua did was stronger. How did Yoshua conquer the land? With force. He came in and he forcibly took over the land. He conquered, he kicked everybody out. How did Ezra get the land? He came and he moved in. He settled. They didn't forcibly remove anybody. If we had to guess which one is stronger, we would think the way that Yoshua came in with Am Yisrael, that should be the one that's a stronger type of Kedusha. So everyone asks, why is it that the Kedusha of Olei Mitzrayim, when they came in and Yoshua and kicked everybody out, that was only temporary and was removed once the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, and yet when Ezra comes and settles the land, that Kedusha remained even after the second destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. What's the difference between the two? Why does the second one remain forever? Well, Soloveitchik, in a beautiful essay in Al HaTshuva, in one of his well-known books, Al HaTshuva, which wasn't written by him, it was written by one of his students, a collection of his tshuva drashas. So he writes a beautiful suggestion. It's not. I didn't bring it for you here, but if you look, it's in the book Al HaTshuva. It's in the back. It's one of the last two essays. There's even a reference to it that says Kibush Yoshua v'Kibush Ezra. Rav Soloveitchik points out that there was a fundamental difference in the way the two different kibushim were done. When Yehoshua conquered the land, he conquered from the outside in. First they conquered around Yericho, and then Shechem, and only eventually later, much later on, did they eventually get. In fact, says Rav Soloveitchik, when Yehoshua first conquered the land, there was no Beit HaMikdash, there was no Yerushalayim, and so everything started from the outside in. That type of Kedusha, where the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael only began, and yet there wasn't a Kedusha of Yerushalayim at that time, was a temporary Kedusha because it came from the outside in. When Ezra and Nehemiah return, what's the first thing they start with? They start with Yerushalayim. They start with building the Beit HaMikdash. So when they start, and then they settle in Yerushalayim, and then they slowly settle outward, and outward, and outward, and outward, and outward, more and more and more and more, says Rav Soloveitchik, that was Kedusha that started with Yerushalayim and slowly spread out. A Kedusha that starts from the outside and only later gets to Yerushalayim, that has to be a temporary Kedusha. Because that is a Kedusha where the focal point isn't the Kedusha of the Beit HaMikdash and the Kedusha of Yerushalayim. But a Kiddusha, or a settling that begins with Yerushalayim and then moves outward, that is a Kiddusha that will be Kitcha L'Shaita, V'Kitcha L'Asalav. It will be eternal. Because when the focal point of our settling of the land begins with Yerushalayim and then only expands outward, where we focus on keeping the main thing, and only then expanding outward, that is the type of Kiddusha where we're basically taking the Kiddusha of Yerushalayim and spreading it outward to the rest of Eretz Yisrael. And only then can the Kiddusha remain for eternity. And so Rav Soloveitchik is pointing out in very beautiful fashion is that all of the Kiddusha of Eretz Yisrael ultimately stems from the Kiddusha of Yerushalayim. And so as we celebrate Yom Yerushalayim this evening and tomorrow, hopefully we have a little bit more food for thought regarding the significance and the meaning of Yerushalayim, not just as a mechaber, as a connector, but also as the source for all of the Kiddusha that we have here in the land. Wishing everyone a wonderful day and a wonderful Yom Yerushalayim.